He's in Dubai and the Middle East at the moment, giving some talks and lectures on not just Balanced Scorecard, but some of his newer management thinking. And it's a real pleasure to have him in this studio. Dr. Kaplan, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good afternoon.
So many things, so many places to start. A recent survey by IIR, a conference company with which you do some work, showed that more than 80% of leading executives in the region are using some form of Balanced Scorecard, the management methodology that you developed back in the early 1990s. When you developed Balanced Scorecard 20 years ago, did you in any way, shape or form think that it would become such a global phenomenon, and 20 years later 4 out of 5 businesses in the Middle East would be using some form of it?
No, we certainly didn't. We were dealing with an issue at the time, a local issue, we thought, on performance measurement, and to fill a gap in companies' performance measurement systems, that they were only measuring their results using financial metrics. And given the importance of the firm's focus on customers, on processes, and on their employees, we felt it was important to measure those key inputs directly rather than indirectly through their results in the financial measures. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, but we could have no idea what it has grown to and become in the next 20 years.
If we look at the 4 perspectives, one very simplistic way of looking at it, as you say, not just financial. Finance is one of them, and then you've got the customer, internal business process, and then learning and growth. It seems so obvious now, but you say at the time there was just such an obsession with financial measuring and financial reporting, and that was not balanced.
That's right. Well, you have this tremendous emphasis on financials because companies have to produce financial statements. They need audits of the financial statements, and so all the attention gets directed to quarterly and annual reporting based on generally accepted accounting principles. And unfortunately, we lost sight of what's really driving value. Financials are just keeping score, but it's not what's really driving the values. And we believed, and we believe today, that if you don't measure something, you can't manage it well. And if customers and employees and innovation and process improvement are key to long-term success, and if you don't measure it, you're not going to do well. So it was just based on that simple idea that we should measure those things that are the key drivers of long-term and sustainable value creation.
It has moved on, Balanced Scorecard, hasn't it? I think there are 5 or 6 manifestations of Balanced Scorecard. Or
well, what happened, and we learned this shortly after our first article appeared, is that while it did solve this performance measurement gap that I just described, the company executives told us that there was a much more important problem they faced that this helped them solve as well, and that was an ability to describe and implement their strategies. And so back even into the early 1970s, partly through a lot of work done at my school, Harvard Business School, we got a lot of concepts on how to formulate strategies and create strategies. But we missed the downstream part of it, which was how do we put into action the strategies that we've created and described. And the statistics that we became aware of was that up to 80% of companies failed in the execution of their strategies. And it turned out, as we didn't know it at the time, but this was the perfect tool to help people implement their strategies. And I think that's really what sustained it over the next 15 to 18 years and kept it going. And so today our focus really is on how to use this tool for strategy execution.
And your most recent book is The Execution Premium. That's the title of the book, linking strategy to operations for what you call competitive advantage. Execution, though.
Yes, and that remains executives' number one problem. Surveys done every year, and they identify, what are you worried about the most? What keeps you up at night? Strategy execution continually tops that list. And another dimension of this, and certainly in this region, is that we learned it's not just for private sector companies. Public sector agencies and nonprofits desperately needed this system because for them the financials are just an input but don't describe the outputs or the outcomes they're trying to achieve, which is creating value for citizens and constituents. So that's been a very gratifying extension as well to help nonprofits and public sector agencies implement their strategies and create value for their citizens.
You're out here in the Middle East. It's by no means your first visit to the Middle East. You travelled the world. Are there any specific issues that you see when you return to the Middle East time and time again that organisations have here? Any problems that managers come to you and go, yes, Professor Kaplan, that's great, but here in the Middle East it's a little bit different?
Well, the number one explanatory factor that distinguishes between success and failure in the implementation of our approach is leadership. Leadership is what really drives that. It's the one aspect that's outside our control. And I think one of the issues that comes up in the Middle East sometimes is the quality of leadership, both in the private sector and the public sector, where people can get into positions not because of merit and ability, but because perhaps of inheritance or political connections. And so that, that can be a barrier if we don't have, the right kind of leadership in an organization to drive it forward. But certainly we've seen great examples of terrific leadership, and what brings me back to Dubai and the Emirates in general, I actually think is the quality of the leadership at the most senior levels of government, who truly does seem committed to creating, great places to live here and great places to work. And I think that's creating the environment in which our approach is adapting and flourishing here.
The world has been through turmoil. The business world has been through turmoil over the past 2 or 3 years with the bubble and the bursting and the credit crunch. What lessons have you and your researchers at Harvard learned from that, and how can they be applied to the balanced scorecard?
Well, what was surprising, if not stunning to me, starting in 2007 and certainly through 2008, was how badly companies, the financial companies and real estate companies, identified and managed their risk. And so this was actually, for me, the discovery of another big gap in companies' management systems, which was the effectiveness of their risk management systems. And I've been working on that quite intensively for the last 3 years, and we've been making some progress. Now, to respond back to your question, one of the biggest risks companies face is the risks that are inherent in your strategies. And all strategies have risks, and the firms take on those risks in the expectations of the rewards that they can get if they're able to be successful and not have those risks occurred. And so we're now in the process of using strategy maps and balanced scorecards as the launching framework for then thinking much more systematically about what risks are involved in the strategy. And if we can let those emerge, then we can work through what initiatives we have to take on to reduce the likelihood that the risk event occurs, or to deal with the consequences once it does occur. So I think this whole risk management approach and the emergence of that is important. Linked to the strategy has been one of the major things we're looking at, and actually Harvard Business School in general, because nobody in the school was really looking at this as an important management function.
And indeed, business schools, and perhaps Harvard in particular, because it is the most famous of them all, have come for a degree of flack over the credit crunch. It was the financial engineering programs taught at business schools such as Harvard that encouraged people to go out and use massive leverage. You've heard these criticisms many, many times before. To what extent were those criticisms of not Harvard Business School specifically, but the business school environment, if you like, of teaching that kind of financial engineering and financial economics courses that could facilitate the credit crunch? To what extent is that criticism valid?
Well, it has some validity, but we can lose sight that actually there is some benefit from financial engineering, and the developments of these financial instruments does make us better off. It enables us to take risks out of organizations or enterprises and shift it to places who are better able to absorb the risks. And so it is enabling us to diversify and, in principle, handle risk much better. And I think, and that's why we're not going to see that go away. At some level, however, I know one of my colleagues makes the analogy, it's like developing anti-lock braking systems. Is that an advance in our technology? Well, yes, you bet. It really helps us avoid skids. But the problem is we get too much confidence in that technology. And in New England and Boston, where I live, we get a lot of snow and ice. And people think, oh, now I have an anti-lock braking system, I can drive a lot faster, even though I'm on snow and ice. And ultimately, that's not a good idea. And so people push too hard on this technology, just like they might drive too fast, even though they have anti-lock braking systems. So we had to understand, what are the limitations even of these new technologies. And again, that part of that is this risk management aspect that we did neglect, no question about it. And we've not featured it, and we're trying to build now the knowledge base that will enable us to make our students and the executives that we teach much more aware of this, so they can, still allow the innovation to occur, but have a risk identification and risk management system that's comparable to the risks that we take on with our innovation. And we can see it not just in the financial sector. We can see what happened with BP, which takes on a very risky project of drilling deep in the Gulf of Mexico. And why do they do that? Well, that's where the oil is, and there are a lot of rewards for doing that. But with that kind of risky drilling, comes some alternative consequences, and they did an extremely poor job of anticipating that risk, training their employees in coping with it, and we ended up with a huge disaster. So the gaps in risk management, even though they became visible in the financial sector, apply in all sectors. And I guess we see it in Dubai. As I was driving out here this afternoon for the studio, I passed a lot of empty buildings. And so it seemed like a good idea. Let's keep adding space and be the business center of the Middle East. But I think we got a little bit too much exuberance here, and there was not enough serious questionings. What are the things that could go wrong? And as a result, the emirate got itself, the city got itself into that situation that it's working its way out of. So this failure to really appreciate the risks associated with our strategies is, I think, somewhat universal, unfortunately. But, we're going to work on this and hope to have better ways for mitigating them while still allowing innovation and excitement and building enterprises to go on.
We're out of time. In 30 seconds, if people aren't fortunate enough to be attending your seminars this week in Dubai while you're in the Gulf, if there's one lesson they can take away as we look to rebuild coming out of the recession of the past few years, what would that be?
Well, I think it gets back to fundamentals. Have a clear strategy where you work, where you are positioning yourself. Communicate that strategy to all your employees so they can help you implement that. But be aware of the things that can go wrong, and try to keep in balance the innovation and excitement going forward, but balance that with an awareness that things can go wrong as well, and not to have the organization fail when a risk event does occur.
Dr. Robert S. Kaplan is the Baker Foundation Professor at the Harvard Business School and the author and founder of the Balanced Scorecard Process. We thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk.